introduce to you, Andrew, Gordon Tollefson, who is the independent member for, to whom we refer any complaints to see that we're doing the things properly. Everybody knows everybody else? Right, okay. Right, we'll start. Are there any appeals against refusal of inspection of documents?
There are no appeals, Chair.
No. Is there any exempt information?
No exempt information today, Chair.
Right. Any late items?
No late items.
And are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other interests? No. Apologies for absence? None, I would say, unless Councillor
Sorry,
Potter.
Councillor Nash. We have received apologies from Councillor Harron today.
Oh, of course. Sorry. Yeah. Right. Minutes of the previous meeting and matters arising. The usual practice is to go through page by page. So the first page is page 5. Okay. Page 6. And page 7.
I have a matter, Chair.
Yeah.
On the very last bullet, we talked about disclosure of addresses for candidates at elections. And I think there was an action that councillors would follow up with the government department on that. So I'm wondering if there's been any follow-up on that item.
Would you like me to come in on that one, Chair? Yes, it's a very good point, Councillor Dawson. The government haven't changed their position on this in terms of elected members, local authority elected members. It remains a recommendation from the Committee on Standards in Public Life from their report from a couple of years ago. Again, unfortunately, government haven't responded to the recommendations made by the committee to government. I think probably delayed by the government response to COVID, but we'll keep an eye on that and we'll make sure that members are updated if we hear anything further.
Yes, because as you know, members of parliament are allowed to not put their home addresses on the ballot paper, but councillors have to. Right, okay. Perhaps we could pursue that point again, not let it be forgotten about. Okay, right, and the last page, which is page 7. Okay. Right. Item 7 is the annual report of the monitoring officer to the Standards and Conduct Committee. Catherine, would you like to speak to this, or would you, Andy?
I think Andy's actually done all the legwork on this and actually drafted it, although I have had input, so yes, I think it would be remiss of me to take the credit for it, but I will chip in as and when, if that's okay, Chair.
So that's page 11.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Catherine. As per usual, here's the annual report from the monitoring officer. 2 or 3 things I'd like to bring to members' attention. Firstly, on training and advice. We have continued to provide training to members during the year on a remote basis, particularly where there's been issues that have been raised arising out of complaints or other correspondence that we've received. And you'll see in paragraph 3.4 the types of training and advice that we've provided to members during the year. We have continued to send reminders to members in terms of registers of interest as set out in para 3.7. Probably the most important element of the report giving feedback to members is the complaint handling, and that element of the report starts on page 13. Probably the most sort of significant thing to report back to members is on the number of complaints that we've received against Leeds City Council members, which appears on first reading to have gone up quite substantially. We've had 41 complaints during the year. But I do want to just emphasise, as I have in para 329, that actually the number of incidents of complaint are actually less than they were when we last reported to you. So 8 separate issues being reported by way of complaint as opposed to 10 last year. So basically the reason for that is a multiple complaints that we had in relation to one incident, and that's referenced at the top of the first table there, complaints 1 to 32. I'd also just like to confirm again that as it was last year, social media continues to be the primary source of complaints that we've had against members. Moving to parish and town councils, again, we've set out in summary form the high level complaints that we've received in respect of parish and town councils, broadly similar to previously, and no real issues of concern to raise with members. And also, you'll recall at the last meeting, you asked for a bit more detail on the number of informal contacts that we've had through the councillor conduct email address, and para 334 provides that detail to you. The contacts that we received were replied to the people who have made contact with us. Broadly speaking, those contacts result in us in sending a complaint form, details of how to complain and what the procedure is for managing those complaints. And broadly speaking, we didn't get responses to that initial contact, so members of the public weren't minded to follow up. Also, you ask us each year to provide further feedback on how the complaints procedure has operated. And this year we've made a number of recommendations that appear in Appendix 1 to this report. And I'd really encourage members to review those with us and agree to make recommendations to amend the existing procedures to ensure that we keep them up to date and fit for purpose. I don't know whether Catherine, at that point, you might want to just comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think generally if I just take them collectively rather than going through them individually, but largely I think that they're for clarification, really to ensure that members of the public are made more aware, hopefully in a more understandable way about how we operate our processes. I think Andy and I recognise, and the chair as well, when we discussed this at chair's brief, recognise that obviously we spend quite a lot of time on standards and conduct matters, and therefore I think it's sometimes easy to forget that many of the people, many members of the public who are seeking to use these processes are coming to this entirely for the first time and perhaps don't understand the language. And so we've tried to look at that and reflect on that, and just make the language, I think, a bit more transparent and perhaps a less technical, less jargon, really. I don't know if Andy wants to say anything else on that score.
Well, just by way of addition, a number of the complaints that we've had to deal with this year have kind of tried to hook onto the code of conduct complaints process when often complaints can be perhaps better routed through other mechanisms. So we've included in this particular document a recommendation in respect of paragraph 6J to reference that. And we've also had instances where there's been vexatious complaints against members, and we haven't in the past had an assessment criteria that transparently enabled us to properly assess those on that basis. And particularly, as Catherine's alluded to, when we evaluate the complaints, it is quite a time-consuming exercise, obviously involving the independent person. And I think when we've stepped back from the complaints this year, I think having that as an additional clarification in the procedure will help as part of assessment as well.
Yeah, I think obviously we have finite resource within the council to deal with those complaints, and as Andy said, I think it's very important that those resources are targeted really at the more serious complaints rather than any sort of frivolous or perhaps more vexatious. And we also wanted, I think, to provide some clarification to members of the public that it's quite right and proper in almost every situation that the member who's been complained about is, you know, their views are sought about that complaint, and I don't think, perhaps I think we could have made it clearer in the procedure, and hopefully now we have done that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Would any member like to comment on that? Andrew? Yeah.
I have a few questions on the report, if that's okay, Councillor Nash.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for this report. So on paragraph 3.14, were there any requests refused? So that's members asking to have data taken down from the council's website.
Let's have a look.
It's page 12 of the pack, paragraph 3.14.
Yeah, so that's to do with dispensations, not to do with the section 32 withholding of data from the register. In terms of dispensations, there's been no requests that have been formally made by members which have not been agreed to. So the standard dispensations that that are in place are in place for all members. There's no bespoke ones for individual members.
Yeah, thank you. And then 3.16, and maybe this is me not understanding properly, but it talks about granting dispensations to newly elected members. How is that different to non-newly elected members?
So the dispensations that are granted for the member's term of office. So when there is a newly elected member or a member that is re-elected, then those dispensations are re-triggered for those members. In effect, the standing dispensations that all members benefit from.
Yeah. So in that sense.
Sorry, Councillor. So they're not in a new member isn't in a different or better position than any other member.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. And so newly elected member could be a councillor who's been elected for 20 years, but then gets newly elected again. Yeah, great. Okay. On page 15, paragraph 3.32, something was reported to the police. Do you know if they took any action? So the first complaint, reference A, paragraph 3.32 on page 15.
Yeah, in relation to that particular complaint, the complainant didn't take the matter to West Yorkshire Police.
Okay, thank you. And then into the appendix, I noticed there did seem to, I can see there's a lot of changes, but don't seem to change anything like substantive. Maybe that's just me, but on paragraph 5.6, just a couple of questions on that one. So item E, I guess the question is, assume there's a different procedure for non-elected members, and say, for example, like if someone had a complaint against Gordon, I don't imagine they would, but if someone did, would there be a separate procedure for that?
Could I have the number again, Councillor Scott?
Yeah, I'm on page 22 of the pack, paragraph, I think it's paragraph 6 now, because an extra paragraph has been put in. Item paragraph E, complaints related to alleged actions of employees of the council or non-voting co-optees.
Yes.
No further action will be taken, and I guess I'm just checking there's another procedure for such complaints.
Yes, there is the employee code of conduct and the procedures relating to that. And in terms of non-voting co-optees, it's probably a bit of a grey area, to be honest with you, because they fall without the Localism Act in terms of the application of the of having to have a register of interest and a code of conduct that they sign up to, and probably more readily dealt with if there are concerns through the monitoring officer and the head of paid service, and whichever committee they might be co-opted to in a non-voting capacity. in terms of shame that Gordon's been singled out. You've been very well behaved all year, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to single you out. We've just appointed a non-voting independent member. Well, it will hopefully be appointed in the February meeting for the corporate governance and audit. And again, that'll be a non-voting independent member. So I'm just, that sort of thing is just, that's why it's on the back of my mind.
Yeah, I think in that particular instance, Councillor Scopes, it would be for the chair in the first instance, working with the lead senior officer to deal with any issues of concern.
Okay. And then my final point is, do we think, so paragraph H, and then it's got a little sub bullet, item 5, do we think 6 months is too short a time to call it ancient history?
I think that's probably more of a member matter, as members have approved that position previously. I think from an officer point of view, I think going beyond that, when you're doing an assessment, it's often quite difficult to get contemporaneous information to be able to provide a reasonable assessment of a complaint. But I've got nothing further to bring to that, I'm afraid.
Okay, so what we're saying is after 6 months, it's hard to start an investigation because witness data is probably less reliable because all of us forget stuff. Okay. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. That's all I had. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes. I've got something I'd just like to raise, but has anybody else got anything? Well, it's just on page 15 about complaints and the registration of a disclosable pecuniary interest. I take it from this that it's up to the complainant to approach the police, and we do not refer the complaint. I mean, for example, if somebody complains that a councillor has well, in short, stolen money from the council by using the council services improperly, then that person is directed to complain to the police themselves rather than us complain to the police. Is that correct?
I think there's probably two distinct things here. Firstly, if there was that accusation of theft, I think that would engage our internal audit, and there'd be police inquiries that would follow. So we would refer that through those processes.
Yes.
Where there might be a complaint in relation to the non-registration of a disclosable pecuniary interest, we don't have any jurisdiction in that respect.
No, I know.
And we would put the onus on the complainant to make that referral, or we offer to make that referral on behalf of the individual concerned. So we can facilitate that being brought to the police's attention if the complainant wishes us to, but otherwise, yes, it would rest with the individual.
Yes.
But
yes.
Obviously we would seek their formal consent to do that, their explicit consent, before we forwarded a complaint to the police. But as Andy said, we would do that if we received that.
Yes.
Consent.
I see the Standards and Conduct Committee not only to facilitate genuine complaints about members, but also to protect members. And as has been reported, we do get an awful lot of vexatious complaints. And the question on the application form, which we always send to people if they make a complaint, there's a question, what do you require? And that usually stops the complaint going forward. And I'm just wondering, this is another thing. I think people tend to back off if they think that they have to complain to the police, and the police may counterclaim that they are wasting the police's time, which in itself is a complaint. I think the thing is, we spend quite a bit of time actually discussing hypothetical situations, and I'm very happy to report that it's not the case in Leeds. On the complaints that we did receive, you'll note that 33 complaints were about one member using social media, and that was dealt with by the political party quite swiftly actually. But generally, Leeds is extremely good, probably because we've got a very strong political party political system in Leeds, that the political parties won't tolerate any bad behaviour by its members.
Councillor Nash, could I just make an observation on that? Actually, having worked in a number of local authorities
Right.
through my career, I would absolutely concur with that. Actually, I think Leeds has a very well developed, a very mature whip system actually, which works very well. Particularly, I think where you have parties or you have groups with large numbers of members.
Yes.
I think it doesn't always necessarily work quite so well when you've got a very small number of members.
No. No.
But by and large, I think it certainly during my career, it seems to be it's the best setup I've seen anyway.
Good.
Right. Okay. Anybody else on the report? No. Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Local Government Association model of Councillor Code of Conduct. That is on page 39.
Would you like me to introduce that, Chair?
Yes, indeed.
As members will recall from last year, this was one of the key recommendations that came out of the Committee on Standards in Public Life inquiry into local authority ethical standards. The recommendation from that committee was targeted at the Local Government Association to work with stakeholders to develop a national code for local government and for parish and town councils. And the LGA have put a really significant amount of work into pursuing that recommendation. And what's presented to members here is the outcome of the LGA's work, which was agreed by the LGA prior to Christmas, and it's trying to put in place a consistent national framework. And I think, having reviewed it and certainly having had discussions with the chair, and through the chair we've had input from political groups, I think there's a feeling that actually this is a really significant step forward in terms of getting consistency. We've also, as is detailed in the report, made inquiries with the Committee on Standards in Public Life, who agree that it is a step forward in terms of taking forward their recommendation. And really, I think the next step is for this committee to review the code, determine whether we feel that it's a code that should be adopted in full by Leeds. And if that is the recommendation of the committee, then that would require referral through to General Purposes Committee, and then a decision of full council. And really, Chair, I didn't want to sort of say much else by way of introduction, and perhaps just invite members to comment.
Yes, my feeling, and I did mention this at the brief, is that although I have got a query about something which I will raise again, I think if we start messing about tweaking it here and tweaking it there, it no longer becomes a national code of conduct. But the thing that I'm particularly concerned about, before I bring anybody else in, is on page 53, and it's about the disclosing of pecuniary interests. Now, at the moment, it's just for one partners or husbands, wives, the person whom you live with. Members of the family and friends are not counted. But this one, it's recommended that that you do declare an interest of a friend, a relative, and close associate. Now, I can see this causing all sorts of trouble because members may not know the interests of these people. And I think it's most unfair if councillors are being held to account on something like that. And I'm just wondering, when the Localism Act was published in 2011, what does the Act say?
Chair, the Act is very clear in terms of the registration of interest. It's the disclosable pecuniary interests of the member and their spouse or civil partner.
Well, I find it difficult to reconcile this then with the Act, which is the law. Has anyone any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd like to comment, Chair.
Yeah.
I'd agree with your comments. I find it very difficult that you can actually declare an interest that you're unaware of. You know, I think it's almost impossible.
I think.
Sorry, which paragraph are we on, Councillor Nash?
It's page 53 and 8.
Yeah, I agree with you, Councillor Nash. Like,
yeah.
So my brother, for example, lives in Leeds. He's a close friend of mine and clearly a close relative.
Yeah.
If I need to declare property he had in Leeds, it would seem very, very strange thing. So I'd put on my interests his properties, and also I don't necessarily know all of his investments. So whilst he's my brother, I don't ask him what he's bought necessarily.
I don't think you'd have to register, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have to register those interests. It's just if you're in a meeting and the issue crops up. And I suppose if people, I don't know what your brother's business is, but suppose it's, I don't know, a coach company, and the council are awarding a contract to a coach company, and it happens to be your brother that gets the contract. And I think at that point you would have to declare an interest. But I just find it a bit vague. And I'm worried about adopting something which is not in the Act, which anyone could take you to court over.
I think in terms of court proceedings, Chair, I don't think that would necessarily follow, but I do accept the point that members are making, and but equally, if it is a known interest of a member at the time that they are engaging in the particular matter, if the view is of committee members that really should be an instance where members take a step back, then I don't think it would be remiss of the committee to recommend that we add that phrase in where it is a known interest.
I think so. I really do think so.
Maybe in legal legislation often falls back in this situation on a term such as reasonableness. So what it might be reasonable for someone to know about someone. So, you know, if you're in business with your brother, it might be reasonable to have a greater understanding and knowledge of what his business interests are. If your brother lives in Australia and you haven't seen him for 25 years, it probably isn't reasonable in those circumstances. So I think a bit of, you know, common sense and reasonableness probably needs to be exercised over that aspect, Chair.
But does the law allow you to do that? Because there have been prolonged court cases on people's interpretation of the law, and as I say, this isn't the law. It's and the law quite clearly says your partner or spouse.
Yeah,
I am quite concerned about it.
Yeah, there is also that, you know, potentially someone may still be married to someone, but you know, be estranged, for example, and you may not actually be aware of that person's interest. So, I mean, I suppose if members wanted to, we could, subject to any comments from Andy and Nicole, I mean, there's no reason why we can't just simply rely on the legislation. It feels to me as though this code is going further, and there are probably good reasons for that. But I think you're pointing out all of the pitfalls of that. The other side of that is the balance between adopting hopefully a fairly nationally consistent code and then starting to tweak it. But I think if members have a particular legitimate concern about a specific aspect of the code, as I think members do in this case, there's no reason why members can't decide to not adopt that part and either stay where we are or adopt a different view.
Well, I personally would not like to adopt that little section, but I think the LGA should be informed of that, because I strongly believe that you cannot go beyond the law. It's unreasonable. And you could get a hypothetical situation where a councillor does not declare the interests of a relative or close associate. I suspect close associates won't be close associates anymore. It says actually friend. I mean that is going beyond what is reasonable, and the councillor could sue the authority in a hypothetical case. If the authority decided that this person should be censored or suspended, then the councillor could sue for defamation. Now, I'm really quite worried about that, and I know we talked about it at the briefing, but obviously I've been thinking about it since, and the more and more I think about it, I don't think we can accept it. But what do other members think? Councillor Dawson, what did you?
I mean, I agree with you and Councillor Scopes. I don't think we can accept it. I think the choice is, do we put a caveat in that says where known, or do we go back to the LGA and ask for them to come back with the form of words? I'm happy to adopt the code with a simple caveat. You can only declare interest with a close relative where you know about them. You know.
Even that in a court wouldn't really stand up.
Chair, I agree with what Councillor Dawson and yourself are saying, because you can have very close friends and relatives and not know what they're involved with and things and assets. Yeah. You don't start asking people, do you? No. Oh, what have you got and what are your interests? I think it's something that does need to be followed through, as you've said.
Yeah. So what about a way forward then, if everybody's in agreement with what I'm saying?
Chair, can I just Councillor Potter had her hand raised.
Oh, I should come. What?
Yes.
Hello.
Sorry, I've been here. I was 3 minutes late. I couldn't get on.
I'm sorry.
And I mean, I think the term friend is terribly vague. How do you define friend? How far do you go in your little pool? Some people are friendly, but I mean, as somebody else said, we've no idea what a lot of our not intimate details of their business affairs. It's not always well known. So I think it's very difficult, and from a parish council point of view, I think it would be very difficult to expect people to accept, you know, such a wide-ranging code of conduct. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Chair, if I might perhaps assist on this one, I think it's a very valid point, and to be honest, it's probably one of the areas of discussion in the sort of officer local government community, which is causing a bit of angst amongst monitoring officers as well. And I think it would be reasonable for the committee to reach a view on paragraph 8B, which is the one that you've drawn members' attention to, and for the recommendation to be that we adopt the code in full, with the exception of paragraph 8b
Yeah.
in that particular annex. And I think generally speaking, the rest of the code that the LGA have pulled together sits quite well in terms of the conduct culture that we have in Leeds, and it would feel a shame to lose all of that good work on that particular sentence, albeit I accept it's got quite significant ramifications for members if it were to remain in. So I think we could feed back to the LGA that that's been a bit of a sticking point and a somewhat of a stumbling block in terms of the wholehearted recommendation to adopt. But otherwise, we think that the code is a pretty good starting point for members nationally. Should the government change the legislation, then because I know that that's part of where the Committee on Standards in Public Life were coming from, then obviously when the law changes, then we can again amend the code.
Yes. I mean, on the whole, it's remarkably similar to the Leeds Code anyway, but there's just that point. There's just a minor point, which on the gifts and hospitality, they have adopted the Leeds model of £50 gift. That sounds a lot, but if you go to the theatre or a soccer match, or you soon use up that 50 quid. But we'd also adopted the Committee for Standards in Public Life, that if you received less than a £50 gift, but you had a series of gifts adding up to £100 from the same source, then that should be declared. Well, they haven't mentioned that, and I don't feel strongly enough about that to say that we should adopt that. I mean, I'm keen that there be a national code so that there's no confusion between different authorities, because members do serve from Leeds City Council. You serve on things like the Fire Brigade, which has its own code, and other organisations. So I think a national code is very important, but I still cannot accept anything which is not in a legal requirement, as in the Localism Act. So, does everyone agree with that? Does Mr. Tollefson have any comments on that?
Totally endorse what you've said, Councillor Nash, and colleagues who've spoken. I think it's quite a frightening position, to be honest, because a friend may not wish you to know what they're doing. Exactly. And I think it's quite frightening. I totally support what you're saying.
Right. So I've just remembered, I think Councillor Campbell did comment that he thought if a member was a member of a group or a club, that should be declared. But again, this is a tweak to their code, but we could bring it to the attention of the LGA, even if we don't at this point adopt that recommendation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to refer that on to the LGA chair on the committee's behalf.
Yeah.
In what circumstances should you declare, just so I have context of that recommendation?
Well, if you're a member, well, like my husband is a member of a cricket club. I did actually declare an interest when a matter came up adjacent to that club, to their field, and it impacted on it, and I did declare an interest at that point. Sports clubs, I don't know, working people's clubs, anything. Yeah.
Councillor Harrison has his hand.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. With the mentioning, obviously, of the sports clubs, and we're saying about knowing what friends are doing, that opens a big can of worms, because if you've got 12 friends that you play a game of football with, Are you going to then be held accountable for what they're doing? Exactly. And this is, I think this is a big can of worms we're going to end up opening if we're not careful, because then you're a member of 3 different teams. There could be 40, 50 people that you're friends with. You don't have a clue what they're doing. Exactly. So I think we need to be very careful in what we do go for and make sure we don't make things more difficult for people, I think.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm driving at. But by the way, you wouldn't have to put in your register of interests that you're a member of a sports club. It's just if it came up in a planning application or something like that, you'd clearly have to declare it. But anyway, I think we've given this a good hiding. Has anybody anything else to raise? No. Okay. Right, so we are now on to item 9, the draft annual report of the Standards and Conduct Committee to the full council. This really, I suppose, encompasses what we've all just been talking about. It's on page 59.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a very brief introduction. You're absolutely right. This is the draft paving report to full council, which would go in March. Yeah. As you recall, last time the committee met, we made a similar resolution on a previous annual report. Unfortunately, that full council meeting didn't take place, so the committee's not had an opportunity for over 12 months to present at full council. So this is the mechanism by which you can inform full council of the committee's work.
Yes, indeed. And it is a statutory requirement, I understand.
It's certainly a recommended requirement. I don't think there's necessarily a statutory requirement to do it, but it's certainly best practice, Chair. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Has anyone any comments on this?
No, as Andy said, it's absolutely best practice to do it, although not all councils take the opportunity, I think, but
yeah. Right. Has anybody anything else to raise on the rest of the agenda, even though we may have gone through it? Okay. So everybody happy with what we've discussed? Right, well, all I can do now is thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.